I was reflecting on how psychology and spirituality both have a similar goal of improving your well-being, and they go about it in different ways, but there's a lot in common as well. There's also some differences I'll talk about as well, but one thing I've noticed is that a lot of contemporary teachings such as Buddhism and teachings of Eckhart Tolle and these kinds of teachers that focus upon how thoughts lead to suffering really have a tremendous amount in common with cognitive psychology, which is the most common form of psychology practiced by most therapists, counselors, psychologists, and so forth. And I think that I think that the reason that cognitive psychology is becoming so popular is for the same reason that contemporary spirituality is becoming more appealing to people than a lot of dogmatic religions. They both, cognitive psychology and contemporary spiritual teachers, are really looking at the core of what it is that creates the most suffering, because anyone who's objectively observing can see that it's not about your life situation so much as it is about your perception of it. And a lot of what creates suffering is comparison between what is happening and what is our preference. What would we prefer to be happening? But a lot of suffering comes from when you don't see it as just a preference. You see it as, I need such and such to be different for myself to be happy. And a cognitive psychologist will say you need to restructure your thoughts and change your shoulds and musts to a preference and learn to accept things. And acceptance to what is happening is also a primary teaching for a lot of spiritual teachers as well. Don't fight against what is happening. Just surrender to the moment. Be in the now without fighting against it. They're all getting at the same thing. One thing that is different is that psychology is, well, it's practiced in many different ways depending on who the counselor is. But the study is in the realm of science, and it is correlated with a lot of medical theory, which has to do with diagnosis. And a lot of spiritual teachers will not label you or put you in a category, but a lot of therapists have to, in terms of getting insurance reimbursement and so forth, give you some kind of diagnosis. So I wanted to talk about some of the differences between medical / psychological diagnoses and spiritual occurrences. I used to work with a variety of different people, many of whom were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, so forth, that were hardcore. And I saw that this was around the time of my own spiritual awakening in '97. And I saw that a lot of these people were having spiritual experiences, and they didn't really have the proper support for that. And in the West, where there's not a lot of awareness in comparison to some parts of the East about the intensity of spiritual awakening, unfortunately, a lot of people can be treated inaccurately because of how they're perceived from a medical perspective as opposed to the perspective of this is a spiritual awakening. But that is changing as more people understand what spirituality is really about and separate it from organized religion and dogma. So, for example, you could have somebody who's diagnosed with bipolar disorder, or, you know, what used to be more commonly referred to as manic depression. But a lot of times, I think that what happens is that people, by adjusting to living in the world and fitting in school and work and family and so forth, they suppress an aspect of themselves which later needs to emerge, and that process of emergence can be very intense. And so that can seem like a manic phase of a lot of intensity. Another thing that can seem manic is when you realize that there is a spiritual dimension to life, that you don't just have to believe it because your religion tells you so, or you're breaking out of atheistic ideas that come from, being more science-minded and so forth. And it's a very intense and powerful thing to realize that there are things going on in the spiritual dimension, guidance and synchronicity and all kinds of intense insights and powerful experiences that can be very exciting and powerful. So that can look like a manic phase to an outside observer and perhaps get you on medication, but perhaps you're just having a spiritual awakening. A lot of what is treated with psychiatric medication, it's about your brain chemistry. But your brain chemistry, a lot of times, just doesn't just happen on its own. It's a relationship to what is going on in your life and what is going on to your thinking, and so over time you are altering your own brain chemistry, or experiences in your life are altering your brain chemistry. So I think it's important that people don't see themselves as diseased so much as going through transitions and capable of healing during and after these transitions are moved through. I think that medication can be helpful for people that are having a hard time literally functioning, but I don't like the diagnosis paradigm in terms of how to look at people. Another example could be, you could experience synchronicity in the sense of hearing messages that feel like they're customized to your life through random occurrences, through random songs, random television shows or movies, and they speak to you, so to speak. And I had people, there was a group, I think it was called SMI group, that I facilitated. There were some people that they didn't want to listen to music and so forth. And the SMI, severely mentally impaired group or whatever, a lot of people diagnosed with schizophrenia, they were probably hearing things and freaked out by it. But synchronicity can speak to us, and it can be freaky if you're not used to that kind of thing. But I think a lot of times the universe will ease us into these experiences, so you start first having more typical experiences like thinking of somebody and then they call and that kind of thing like that. Or your dreams will guide you, and you'll start to have predictive experiences and guidance in your dreams. But a lot of times there is a difference in terms of the intensity level of what people experience between these two realms. I heard a quote from Pema Chodron the other day, and to paraphrase it, I can't remember it exactly, but it said something like, the psychotic person drowns in the same stuff in which the spiritual person swims. And I thought that was very profound. Another psychology versus spirituality contrast would be, there's a diagnosis called schizoid personality. It sounds like schizophrenic, but it's quite a different kind of diagnosis. Schizoid personality, I remember I was in graduate school for counseling psychology, and I remember watching a film in a class about a guy who, he just didn't interact with people. He didn't feel connected to people. He was, I think, a film projectionist, and so he would live a lot through films and have those kinds of experiences, but extremely introverted and very much in his own kind of space. And so in spiritual dimension, there are times in which a person, throughout all different kinds of spiritual traditions, you see this, where they feel like leaving the world. They feel like taking a break from it. And I think this can actually be very healthy. If it's causing suffering for you, then it could be a problem, but at the same time, it might be a necessary phase. And even the suffering that may come up may be good, because the process of reclaiming your identity, reclaiming your personality, reclaiming your mind from your socialization process, and from absorbing family values that don't really align with your purpose and so forth, it can be a very intense thing. And it doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong with you if you want to take a break from it all. Also, anxiety is a very common kind of feeling, and I think a lot of anxiety can lead to depression. A lot of times if there's just so much stress and you feel overwhelmed, then depression can be a feeling of having a hard time coping and feeling like I'm sick of all the stress and I'm sick of all the difficulty in life. But anxiety as a root cause of problems, which almost everybody experiences to some degree, anxiety can be treated with medication. It can be examined through interaction with a counselor or therapist or psychologist in terms of what is out of alignment with your life, in terms of what could you be doing differently, what could you be perceiving differently. And the problem with when people are medicated too quickly from a psychiatrist is that they don't have the opportunity to learn from what their body is trying to tell them. And so they can function in the world, and a lot of diagnoses are based on, is what you're experiencing interfering with work or relationships? These are reflective of cultural values, work and relationships. But there are times on your path in which there are things more important than your career or school, job, work, stuff, or your relationships with other people even, that you might need to take a break from things to be able to return to other connections with a more clear and healthy perspective in terms of who you are. So anxiety from a spiritual perspective can be looked at from your inner wisdom telling you that something is wrong, something is out of alignment, something needs to change. And no matter what you do, it will keep coming back. And if you keep trying to medicate it with alcohol, drugs, psychiatric medication, it doesn't really matter what you're trying to self-medicate with, whether it's legal or illegal. Eventually, you are going to suffer and experience pain until what needs to change changes. And that could be how you interact with other people. That could be what you are doing on a day-to-day basis with your life, the direction that you're headed in life. Anxiety can serve a purpose. So if you look at anxiety from a spiritual perspective, you can ask yourself, what is my body trying to tell me? What might I feel better from doing? What will help me feel more in alignment with my true identity, my true purpose? So those are some general thoughts on psychology and spirituality. Thanks for listening.